Okay, I'm going to press play now.
Passionate, outspoken, insightful. Ariva Martin is an award-winning civil rights attorney, best-selling author, legal commentator, and America's advocate. Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
Good morning and welcome to our viewers in the U.S. and around the world. To kick off this morning's broadcast, do me a favor. Please share the show with your online friends or start a viewing party. And remember to post a comment or question. Your voice matters and I want to hear from you. If you live in Texas, California, or Florida, you have heard the headlines. Coronavirus cases are spiking. Hospitals are running out of drugs, beds, ventilators, and even staff. With 3.4 million cases and over 137,000 dead, the US is the coronavirus capital of the world. What was supposed to be a summer free of coronavirus has turned out to be a tsunami of new cases, particularly amongst people under 40 years old. And although the death rate has declined since the virus ravaged the Northeast earlier this year, many of the newly infected are reporting residual symptoms that linger long after they test negative. And on top of the nearly 1,000 people who die and over 70,000 who contract the virus daily, millions of Americans have been forced to return to some form of shelter in place, exacerbating issues of isolation, anxiety, and depression. I wish the news was better, but despite the gaslighting from the White House and the Trump administration, the coronavirus pandemic is taking a physical and mental toll on all of us. And during these tough times, our motto to survive is hope for the best while preparing for the worst. Today, we're going in depth on how to get through all of this. My first guest did survive COVID-19, but she has lingering issues. Melanie, thank you so much for joining us. So we know that you tested positive for COVID in March, and
Yes.
although a recent test has come back negative, you are still suffering with symptoms. Tell us what's going on.
Yes, I still am. It's where I'm kind of part of what it's called the long haulers in terms of these lingering cyclical symptoms. I will say that today has been like one of the better days that I've had, which is wonderful. I'm so excited. I was able to smell flowers today, and I have not had a sense of smell or taste since March 15th. So, but it's been an ongoing cycle. It just feels as if this virus kind of transmutes within your body. And so you're kind of at the whim of whatever, the virus wants to do. You're the host, and it's the parasite. So you're kind of just going through the motions. And yeah, I tested positive March 15th. But I was experiencing symptoms throughout March, April, and May, which is why I went to get a follow-up test. That tested negative. I also tested negative for 2 antibody tests. So it's pretty obscure at this point.
Well, first of all, I want to say I'm so happy to hear your report. We call that a praise report on the special report. And I've interviewed so many people since the height of this pandemic in March, and not all of the stories are as positive as yours. So I'm always excited when I get to meet someone like you. Who's had a recovery. But I guess the reason we wanted to talk to you is because you don't fit. In some ways, you don't fit the pattern, but in other ways, you do. Of people when they think about who gets coronavirus. So, you're in your 30s, right?
Correct, 32.
Okay, 32. So at some point, people thought, in the early days of the pandemic, that this was like an old person's disease, that you had to be 60 or 65, and that if you were a 30-year-old, you weren't likely to get it. Did you have that sense about, coronavirus yourself?
I will say that I was pretty naive when everything kind of first came into play, because March is when we're starting to kind of dip our toes into the water. And I'm in the New Jersey, New York City area. I used to work in the city. live in Teaneck, which was initially considered like the epicenter of northern like New Jersey for the COVID hotspots. And so it was alarming, but I did not ever think that I would be affected by it. But yeah, the guidelines I remember at that time when I was, talking to my physician, I needed to get a test done. You needed to get approval from your primary care physician prior to. I was relaying my symptoms, and I, like you said, I did not fit the criteria because at that point, the criteria was either you're elderly or you're in a demographic in which your health is so compromised that you would be vulnerable and susceptible to this virus. So I fit neither of those boxes. And it was difficult because I myself didn't know how to process this foreign feeling of my own body. It was hard to convey.
Tell us some of the symptoms, Melanie. We've heard, from so many different people, the symptoms ranging from, losing their sense of smell, their taste, to chronic headaches, to some people not being able to, even walk. So, what are some of the symptoms that you had?
So March 15th is basically when everything kind of came into play. I did have a low-grade fever, but it was basically what I was feeling more. And I am asthmatic again, so I could be, someone that is more susceptible. I am more susceptible to this virus. So I was really unable to breathe when I woke up that morning. It just felt as if there was just this weight, this heaviness that was sitting upon my chest. I woke up struggling to breathe. It almost felt like a coughing or a choking feeling, as if, I was not able to breathe on my own. So I had to rely on my rescue inhaler. That was pretty much primary number one. That was a big warning sign for me. And the other ones were, it almost was neuropathy related. I had these pins and needles throughout my thighs, alongside my lower back. And at that point, I was gradually losing my sense of smell, but I'm thinking, well, maybe it is the flu. So maybe it just comes with the territory. I was kind of just going through the motions, but these symptoms emerged worse and worse. Cough was horrible. Just the inability to walk to get a glass of water without needing my rescue inhaler. It was something otherworldly, to be quite frank.
And now having lived with this for the last 90 days or so, what's been the hardest part for you in terms of your recovery process?
The recovery process, it's almost like two-tiered. The isolation is one big factor. I'm a single woman. I live by myself. So, being so self-reliant and not really knowing how to kind of go through the motions of how to adjust when I can't even barely dress myself. That was a problem. But also what really does trigger, it has always triggered me, is the lack of common sense displayed by people that still seem to think that this is just the flu. It's very upsetting because, and I just want to point out figures, if I may, that when people compare this to the flu, annually in this country, it's caps at 61,000 people who will die for like a flu-related symptoms. Okay. At this point, we've already peaked nearly 140,000 American deaths. That's over the course of nearly 140 days. And I say that as February 25th was when the president said, oh, we have everything under control. This is fine. Not a big deal. So from 140 days ago to now, we're facing 140,000 American lives lost. That's basically 1,000 people per day, if you average it, that have died because of incompetence. So mental health has been a problem, but it's more just enraged. It's like I'm enraged because this is so atypical, and I just don't understand people that continue to refuse to accept this is a problem and it needs to be addressed immediately.
I'm so glad that you brought those statistics up, because we've been talking a lot about that on the special report in terms of, one, just the horror of the numbers of people, those numbers. And I can look back to when we started talking about, COVID on the show, and we were talking about 50,000 people dead. And now, as you pointed out, 140,000, and new studies suggest we're going to get to like 280,000 by the fall. So the numbers just keep growing exponentially. And I'm glad you also talked about your rage, because people who've been through it have every right to be upset with those people who continue to think this is nothing. They minimize it. They try to compare it to the flu, as you stated. I want to bring Carrie into the conversation because Carrie is also in that age group of people who, when this virus first started to appear, people thought would not be susceptible to the virus. And Carrie lives in St. Louis, and he and his wife have tested positive. Good morning,
wow.
Carrie. How are you
Hi,
today?
how you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. So, to be clear, you live in St. Louis, and I can remember again in the early days of the special report reporting on COVID-19, St. Louis, at one point, every individual that had tested positive was African American. It was like 250 people tested positive. They were all African American. So you definitely fall into that category of the early diagnosis of folks in St. Louis, but you're in your early 40s, right?
Yeah, I'm 42.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so again, I'll ask you what I asked Melanie. Did you think that this was, a disease for elderly people, and that you, someone who, you look relatively healthy, that, you wouldn't be the person getting COVID-19?
Actually, I took it seriously. I really didn't know. So what I did was I kept my hand sanitizer in the car and my mask on, and I did everything that I thought I was, what I was doing would keep me away from this virus. But some kind of way it caught a hold to me. Now, I will say this, back in March, I think this is the second time I had it, because back in March, I had the same symptoms that I had this last time, but in March, it only lasted for 2 or 3 days. It was real mild. I went to Dallas for a job, for my job training. I got sick in Dallas. I was feeling weak. I had chills. I was tired. I came home the next day. I took off work for a couple days, and then I went to to see my doctor, and they tested me for the flu. They said I didn't have the flu. So after that, I just continued to take medicines. It really wasn't that bad this first time because I don't know why, but I just had a lingering cough for 2 months. So I was like, okay, let me go and get tested and see if I have corona. So after that 2 months, with having that cough, I went and got tested. I tested negative. But again, on Father's Day, I came down, same symptoms that I had in March. I was just tired, weak, chills. And the next day I said, I'm not gonna play with this. I'm gonna go in right away and get tested for COVID. I got tested, and 2 days later they said I had it.
And your wife
Now,
was positive at some point as well?
yeah, so she went like 4 or 5 days after me and got tested. Her symptoms wasn't as bad as mine, thank God, because she helped me through this. She just had a cough and just tired sometimes.
Mild
But
symptoms. What's been the hardest part for you, Carrie? You talked about really having been dealing with this since March, and here we are in July. So what's been happening, with you for the last 5 months, and what's been the hardest for you?
um, so when I contracted it when I got sick on Father's Day, it was like an up and down roller coaster. I went into the doctor, I got tested. I didn't have a fever. I just had all the other signs. I never lost my taste of smell. My taste or my smell. But I had all the other signs of, I was just fatigued, weak, chills. I had hallucinations at night. That was the worst part. At night, just me talking to myself, thinking I'm talking to somebody else, but I'm really talking to myself, saying, hey, you need to get up, drink water. What are you doing? You just can't lay here, because it was so hard for me to get up at night and walk to the restroom, because I quarantined myself in my son's room. So I had to walk down the hallway, and that would take my breath away. Like, once I got there, I couldn't breathe. And like she said, the best thing that they could have prescribed me was this inhaler. And it was, at times, I wouldn't even get out the bed without this. I felt like I was so scared if I didn't take this with me that I wouldn't make it.
So you still, based on everything you're still positive.
So this is why I don't think they really know what's going on, because So after 14 days, I went back, I retested, I tested positive, but my symptoms wasn't as bad. So basically, I just had this light cough and some breathing issues and headaches every now and then, but they would come and go. It was like it went away and then it would come back. But so they told me, okay, if you're not having all these symptoms, that you don't need to come back and retest. Just quarantine for another 5 days, and you'll be okay. But now it's I feel much better, but I still have these lingering. I have a bad cough. I have headaches and just fatigue.
I want to ask both of you, Melanie and Carrie. We've seen so many cases where people end up in an ICU unit, they end up on ventilators, and tragically, as we've talked about, close to 140,000 people have died. Do you, both of you, think that there was anything in your background, your history, in terms of how you treated your bodies, your health care, regiment that made you be, impact that allowed the virus to impact your body in a different way, so that you didn't have these, the hospitalization and the extreme symptoms that we've seen so many other people have? Was it exercise, or do you think it was your diet? Do you think there's anything that you can point to in your history?
I would, for myself, absolutely not, simply because I had a personal trainer right before I became ill. So, I mean, for me, I enjoy being physically active. And that's why I feel like this has been such a detriment to not my physical health, but my mental health, running, exercising. That's been something so important to me to kind of keep ground. And I can't do it the way that I normally would think I would be able to 4 months into the game. So I think the only thing I'm culpable of is riding the subway and getting sick
Do
from
you
that.
think, Melanie, that the fact that you did have a personal trainer and worked out, do you think that's helped you maybe recover faster?
I think that there's so many factors. Oh, bless. Are you okay? How are you feeling?
Yeah, Carrie is struggling some.
Up and
I
down.
know. I know. I feel you. Okay. Yeah. No. The personal trainer perhaps, but again, I think it's just happenstance. I think that we just happen to be people that, for whatever reason, we contracted this virus, and maybe we were meant to just be advocates for it. I mean, I'm trying to find a positive from this entire experience, because it is reassuring knowing that people like yourself are in kind of a similar boat. You're young. I'm young. We're the antithesis of everything that this virus is associated with. So I really don't know how or why, but I'm in a semblance, in some way, I'm kind of glad it happened to me, in the sense that I can actually speak for it, advocate for policy changes regarding this virus. And I'm lucky. We're like the lucky ones, again, 140,000 people would love to be in our place right now. So I don't take that for granted, not one day whatsoever.
I want to bring in the doctor now. I want to bring in Dr. Sadia Khan. She's an epidemiologist and a cardiologist. She's an assistant professor at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. Thank you so much, Dr. Khan, for joining us. I'm going to let you answer that question first before I talk to Dr. Khan. Carrie, do you think there was anything in your background that, and feel free, get water, take as much time as you need. We want to be sensitive to what you're, experiencing. But I'm just curious, do you think there was anything in your background that has helped you, get to this point, or maybe, hindered you in some ways?
I really can't say, but I will say this, that at times I probably should have went to the ER or to the hospital, but I told my wife several times, like, I'm not gonna make it through this. But my friend's mom passed away at the hospital from COVID, and you hear all these stories about how people going to the hospital and they get on this ventilator and they never come back. So I decided to stay at home, fight as much as I can. And the hospital I wasn't going there. I was frightened about going to the hospital because of all the stories that I've heard of people going to the hospital and not making it. So like I said, I stayed at home and just fought it at home. It was rough. It was real rough, but I got through it.
So Dr. Khan, you've listened to Melanie, you've listened to Carrie. You can see even as they participate in the interview, they have visible symptoms. What's going on with these two young, otherwise healthy individuals who are 90 days, 120 days into this virus and still having these symptoms?
It's a really
We are
important question. And Carrie, Melanie, I'm so sorry to hear that you guys are still having symptoms, but glad to see that you're continuing to improve. And unfortunately, like you're both saying, it's not an uncommon occurrence. There was a recent study published out of Italy that showed nearly 85% of people had symptoms at least 2 months after their diagnosis. And the most common symptoms being shortness of breath and exactly what Carrie was describing, that inability to catch your breath or breathe, feeling breathless and winded, doing very simple activities.
So, Dr. Khan, why are we seeing now in what I'm calling the second wave? I know some, infectious disease doctors, public health doctors are saying we never got through the first wave, but I'm kind of thinking of it as a second wave because we're at least seeing younger people. When we started interviewing people on the show about COVID-19, most of the people we were talking about or to were, over 65 years old. And now we're seeing many, many more people being infected who are in the age range of Carrie and Melanie and even younger. So what is it now that's, causing this much larger group of younger people to be infected?
That's an excellent question. And I think early on during the pandemic, one of the challenges and continues to be a challenge was the inavailability and inaccessibility of testing. Even Carrie spoke about when he first had symptoms, he was just tested for influenza and not for coronavirus. As tests have become more accessible, the demographic has partly shifted. And I say only partly because of more widespread testing, although we're still not where we need to be able to be testing at the volume that we need to be able to stop the continued spread.
And is there what I know you're not their doctors, you haven't seen, their medical records, but what do you think is the future? What's the future for, these two young people in terms of, getting past this and being symptom free? Is that a realistic possibility?
I think we want to remain optimistic about that. While there is this very long post disease course where they may continue to have symptoms for some time, it's still early. And our hope is that as they continue to recover, regain some of that fitness and lose some of that deconditioning, how being that ill causes your body to start to get weaker, that they will get better from that. I think we don't know yet the broad and diverse implications of this virus in many organs of the body. And, we think about the lung primarily, but I also think about the heart and other organs and what the long-term consequences may be.
And Dr. Khan, we heard Carrie, and Carrie, you can speak to this better than I can, obviously, talk about hallucinations. I had not heard anyone identify that as a symptom of COVID-19. Is that a common occurrence? Is what Carrie explained or just shared, is that something that many victims experience?
I will say that it's not uncommon, and we've seen more and more neurologic complications. And similar to the hallucinations, other things that we're worrying about are related to stroke as well. So I think we're still learning about all of the diverse manifestations across the body that this virus and the inflammation that is ravaging somebody's body when they get this virus is causing.
So all of you have heard the president say, 99% of the cases are harmless.
Oh my goodness.
What would you say to that, Melanie, to the president or anyone who's not taking this virus seriously?
I think that we have to really come down to the fact that this is not a bipartisan issue. It's not political. This is a pandemic, right? So we need to put pride aside and really start addressing the fundamental issues, which is the fact that there is a lack of leadership in that administration, and it trickles down. Florida, for example, I mean, they are being ravaged by this virus, and yet there's not any mandated protocol to wear masks. It's kind of up in the air, and you have carte blanche if you want to wear it or don't wear it. And one thing I will say about this area, we were very stringent upon how we handle this virus. And I'm very proud of that. So it is as simple as Governors of these states, they need to start mandating certain protocol. They have to. Policies have to be adhered to. My concern also, I'm thinking back to July 4th, that, was 11 days ago. So we still haven't seen anything that has incubated during that time. So God knows what could happen from when people are gathering at barbecues during 4th of July and picnics and family gatherings. This is just the precipice of what could potentially be a massive problem, more so than it is, if people are not taking it seriously, and if we do not have legislation that actually acknowledges and adheres to what needs to be done. Life is going to be inconvenienced. Everyone's life has been completely inconvenienced by this virus, but it's a little price to pay. 6 feet of distance versus 6 feet underground. It's pretty much that simple.
Yeah, and what about you, Carrie? What would you say, one, to the president who made that, fallacious statement? We all know it's fallacious, but I shouldn't say we all know it's fallacious. Lots of people, unfortunately,
Many of us
buy into made by the White House. But what would you say, Carrie, particularly to African Americans who have been, the stats are in twice as likely to die from coronavirus, 3 times as likely to have the virus? What would you say to anyone that's not taking it seriously?
I talk to my friends every day, and I kind of monitor what they're doing on Facebook, and it really gets me frustrated because a lot of them are out at gatherings, parties, at the club, having fun, and I always try to tell them, and I post on Facebook as much as I can to let them know, like, hey, look, if you don't care about what's going on, you need to still protect yourself because you have family and loved ones that you can spread this virus to, and it doesn't care who his next victim is. You could be asymptomatic and not go through what I did, but you go over your grandmother's house or your auntie's house, or your kids are at home, you get them sick, and now you pass this along and potentially killed someone in your family by being reckless. And I'm scared to death because my wife is a school teacher and she's gonna have to go back to work soon. And that, the trickle down effect of what could happen in the schools, as far as kids getting it or the adults getting it and passing it to the kids and they going home to their families. And it's just a trickle effect of what could happen and how it could be passed along. And then it comes back home to me and I have to go through this thing again. And that's something I never, ever want to go through again. So I just don't know. I don't know what to say. I just try to tell people to be careful. And if you don't care about yourself, care about others.
Right. Great words of advice from both of you. And I'll just give you the last word, Dr. Khan. What should people know to do? What should we know? And what should we be doing? Because I think what I'm hearing Carrie and Melanie talk about is the frustration of those people who are not taking this seriously. If there's one piece of advice, Dr. Khan, you would give to everyone, what would that piece of advice be?
I think the most important thing that we've learned as we've gone on is that masks work, and wearing masks when you're in an area, whether it's indoors and you can't physically distance or you're not outdoors able to protect yourself, but also protects everybody around you and anybody who may be in that enclosed space. And that's critical.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. Carrie and Melanie, I and our entire team at the Special Report wish you a full recovery. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your stories, and being a voice for change and helping people understand how we get to the other side of this. I'm optimistic, Dr. Khan, that we will get there, but it's going to take all of us, rowing that boat in the same direction, and all, like you said, wearing those masks. So again, thank you, Carrie and Melanie. Be safe out there and know that we are pulling for you and wishing you the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Wow, this surging coronavirus cases, and Melanie and Carrie, I just applaud them for their strength and what they're doing to take this on. And what we heard Melanie say is what we're hearing so many people say, which is not just the physical toll of coronavirus, but it's also the emotional and mental health toll from this virus. And my next guest wrote a powerful op-ed in The Atlantic about her depression and anxiety before and during the pandemic. Please welcome independent journalist Elizabeth Flock. Good morning, Elizabeth. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
I saw you in the green room, so I know you were able to listen to Melanie and Carrie. And I know you live in a small town that hasn't had the large number of cases that New Jersey or St. Louis, Missouri have had, but you wrote these powerful words about your experience of depression and anxiety. And I just wonder what prompted you to share your story?
Yeah, I'm a journalist, so I don't typically write first person. But as coronavirus developed, I noticed that a lot of people in my circle were really struggling, people who already had depression, anxiety, and also people who didn't. And then I was seeing studies come out, like from the Kaiser Family Foundation, that said something close to 50% of Americans had seen their mental health adversely affected. And so I pitched a story on mental health during coronavirus, and the editor said to me, "Can you share your first person experience? I think it will reach people a bit more." And I was uncomfortable with doing that, but felt that it was important to sort of destigmatize this, especially since my immediate reaction to that was, people like Carrie and Melanie are going through so much more. Why should I talk about my own mental health struggle when people are physically dealing with so much? But the response I got from several folks I talked to was, this idea that pain is pain, and if you're struggling, it's important to talk about it and destigmatize it. And obviously, it's affecting people all over the country in many different demographics. The mental health toll is related to financial instability and just so much stress that this virus has added. It was really important to talk about.
And so sharing your story, and I had a chance to read the story, you talked about having already experienced depression in your life before coronavirus. So how has, the pandemic even worsened that pre-existing condition that you had?
Yeah, depression and anxiety sort of present these symptoms that actually look a lot like life in lockdown. Social withdrawal, feeling really distracted, having trouble sleeping or sleeping too much, not doing activities you once enjoyed. I mean, this all sounds like our life right now. And so if you kind of layer that on top of what folks are already dealing with day to day, it can be really, really difficult. I know that some people who deal with anxiety and depression have told me that they're actually feeling better during this time because they sort of said, now the whole world is feeling what I feel all the time. So I think there's probably different experiences going on. But for me, particularly in the beginning, and it's kind of been waves of this, it's been really difficult to be even more isolated than you already might be feeling. And for those of us living in small towns, my town, I live in Taos, New Mexico, which is just about 6,000 people, it's already really isolating. And to feel that kind of pressure blanket a small town, in New Mexico, worries about Texas and Colorado and other states that might have rising numbers, those tourists coming to New Mexico, there's all these kinds of different stressors. And people with depression and anxiety, I think, often are more sensitive to what others are feeling. And so to go out in the world and see sort of this stress just blanketing everyone can be really hard day to day, and make you feel like, geez, I don't know, like what's worth getting up in the morning for when the world is like this and seemingly will be like this for a long period of time. And you have to kind of step back and sit with yourself with that feeling and try to move through it.
Yeah, I want to bring Dr. Dr. Breland Noble, Alfie Breland Noble, into the conversation. She's a psychologist and a scientist. She's been on the show before. She's one of my favorite psychologists because she gets what we're going through. And I just thought it was so important to have your voice, Dr. Noble, on this conversation, because when we talked before, we were had this expectation that we were going to be past this, that something was going to happen in the summer, magical, that the weather would get hotter and the virus, as our president said, would just poof, disappear. Well, that didn't happen.
No.
And here we are. And, I think even for me, and I'm so glad we're talking about sharing our personal stories, because As Elizabeth said, she's not often telling her story in the first person. And as a host, I'm not often telling mine, but I have to tell you, when California, which is where I live, got notice yesterday that we were going back to some form of shelter in place, it just felt like a rock fell on my head. So help us, Dr. Noble, understand, why is this so hard?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. Like Elizabeth, I was sitting here thinking, I feel like she needs to be the one in the expert chair because she's naming all the symptoms and calling them quite accurately and really enlightening us about what this feels like for people. And I think it's that coupled with we think about the stages of grief, and we thought we were sort of progressing through the stages of grief, and now we're cycling backwards through them because every time there's a new negative piece of information, you're back at square one. And we know that stages of grief, it's not linear, right? We know that it's sort of cyclical and you kind of go back and forth. But to go forward and then to have to come back, it really is, like you said, Miss Martin, it's a weight, right? And you think that you're sort of allowing the weight to dissipate over time because you're at home. Many of us, not all of us, are trying to do things to keep our minds healthy. We're trying to have structure. We're trying to meditate. I'm a big avid meditator. We're trying to exercise. My spouse wasn't able to find any free weights anywhere. We live in the DC area. He couldn't find them anywhere because everybody bought up all the weights and they're doing it at home. You do all of that with the expectation, right? I'm anxious. So I'm expecting that if I keep doing this long enough, eventually I'm going to not have to do this anymore. We'll get out. And you see states opening. Then you see, as you shared, the exponential growth in the presence of the virus in Florida and some other places. And you think, oh my God. And then, like you said, people respond by pulling us backwards in terms of being able to be out. So now we're back on shelter in place. It's just like you said, it's crushing, it's devastating, it makes you sad because you're starting back at square one. So it's all, I think, a very normal response to the circumstances that we're all experiencing.
Yeah, and you raised that point, and Elizabeth said this. Elizabeth, you're not in a town where the numbers are spiking, but you have that concern that you are surrounded by states where there are spiking cases and where governors are involved in these different partisan battles about what to do, make people stay home, close businesses, wear a mask. So you're kind of stuck in between. And like I said, in California, we are in a state where the numbers are spiking. I want to ask you though, Elizabeth, are you, like, in your town, is that debate, do you have the anti-mask versus the mask? Or is that another part of that debate that's going on that's causing anxiety for you?
Oh, absolutely. There's been full out battles in the grocery store over folks who are wearing a mask versus not wearing a mask. Visitors come from Texas who don't wear a mask, and then people in Taos get very upset with them for coming into the grocery store and, being disrespectful and not wearing a mask. There's a whole conspiracy theory about how 5G has caused COVID and may or may not be true. There's signs all over town that says, I think hysteria is the virus. And so there's all these different factions, and then a lot of anger towards any tourists who come to visit. And I think Taos just got named one of the top places to visit during coronavirus, which I don't know why anyone would even write that article, but
so inviting people to bring their
right, come on in.
Yeah, that's not good.
But I feel like, to me, the most helpful thing, jumping off of what Dr. Alvey said about, like, we're working towards this expectation that things will be better, is just saying, today I'm taking it day by day. Every day I wake up and it's all about what's happening today. Because if I try to think in advance, or I hear something on the radio that says we're going to be locked down for another year, or all of these different projections, I start to go, into really dark places in my head. So I don't know if that's helpful for others, but it's helped me.
Yeah, I wanted to get your advice on this, Dr. Alfie. I have a friend who just dropped a bombshell on me. We were out on a distance adventure, because I won't describe, because it'll then give the person away. But and she said that she went to such a dark place that she actually thought about suicide.
Oh yeah.
And I was trying, I'm not a trained person. I felt like that was way too much for me. I'm a lawyer, I'm a host, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a trained, mental health professional. But I did ask her some questions, because that is what I do.
Good.
And one of the things she expressed was the sense of loss, like
Yes.
loss of every activity that she had planned for the year.
Yep.
Trips, celebrations, all canceled. And I just was stunned that that kind of loss that she described would take someone to that place. Are you seeing that during this virus where people literally are feeling so devastated by losses, whether it's money or jobs or careers or trips that they had planned, that they're going into such a dark place, like where suicide becomes?
100%. I mean, because if you think about it, it's grief, right? Part of it is grief, like you're trying to process the loss. But the other part of it is, as Elizabeth shared so eloquently, many of us are already carrying the symptoms of depression and anxiety every day anyway. And so what you're doing is sort of layering on this heavier weight on top of something that people were already trying to process. On top of that, we have really sort of eradicated and taken away from people. You think from a cultural context, there are many communities where that communal, that gathering, that being together is a vital, critical part of what it means to be. So you think in a Black community, church. Of course, not everybody goes to church, right? But every Sunday, for many Black folks, that's the place where you go and get filled. For many Latinx populations too. Just as an example, what happens when you take that away? You're not just taking away the ability to physically go be in other people's presence, you're taking away the social support that people have. And it's very different to try to get that social support on a Zoom call or a GoToMeeting call looking at a computer than it is to physically be close to somebody, to have somebody hug you, to have somebody say to you, like they do to my kids in church, oh, baby, you're getting so big and you're so cute. And right, those grades, I know those grades are wonderful because you're such a smart person. You lose all of that. And so it is absolutely not surprising to me that when you take away a lot of the buffers, the supports that really are sort of like linchpins or like a finger in the dam that are kind of holding people together, that if you remove that immediately, it seems to me that it's very reasonable that people will go to those places where it feels heavy, where it feels like there's no hope, right? And so part of the work, I had the opportunity to work on a suicide prevention task force and to work with the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. And we try to talk a lot about how what you did is exactly the right thing. You start asking questions. You let the person know that you care about them. You let the person know, I'm here for you. Whatever I can do to help you, I want to do it. I will sit with you on the Zoom call. I will talk with you. But I just want you to know that you're valued, that I see you and that I care, and that there's nothing wrong with having a real strong response to what we're all experiencing, right? We want to reassure people. So absolutely, I have seen quite a bit of it, more than I care to have seen. But I feel hopeful because I'm in a position where I can actually kind of walk people through some of this and let them know that it's okay to feel those feelings, but we want to try to do something about it because we don't want them to sit with those feelings and stay in that place.
And how do we do that? So we've talked about, we've kind of diagnosed what the problem is, but in
Yeah.
terms of looking at solutions, how do we
Yeah.
get to that place where we can replace those negative thoughts of loss with more positive thoughts, or thoughts that at least empower us rather than,
Sure.
cause us so much anxiety and angst?
Sure. The first, what Elizabeth said is what I tell people all the time. You have to focus on today. And I said, sometimes for people, they can't even just sit with today. They have to sit with in this moment, right? So sometimes it is really, I'm going to get from moment to moment. As I said, meditation works for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but there are different kinds of meditation. There's silent meditation. There's meditation with music. There's laughter meditation. There's meditation while you're exercising. And really the goal is to focus your mind on those things that bring you up and uplift you. Some people do the coloring books. Some people like to write music or draw or paint. The things that I try to encourage people to do are to find ways to focus your mind on something other than just sitting. A biggie, I think you have to get your news in small doses. Because just like Elizabeth said, if you look at the news, you'll see things like people fighting in the store. The woman who literally sat and had a meltdown at Costco, right? You can't look at that stuff all day because that stuff is just going to wear on you. So what you have to do is, if you need the news, you're a news junkie, right? What you do is very important, Ms. Martin. You got to get it in doses. So you get in, get your dose, and you get out. But I think it really is about making sure that you stay connected, making sure that as you feel, we talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, those thoughts, those feelings, and those behaviors. As you feel yourself start to get worn down, you have to sort of shift the paradigm and get up and do something. Because if you can shift your body and you can shift your movement, maybe you can shift those thoughts. So it really is an active process. And that's the last thing I'll say. Anytime you're trying to cope one of the best ways to cope is to do so actively. You can't sit back and hope that things are going to change. You have to be working towards change, even when it comes to coping.
Have you been, Elizabeth, putting into practice some of these things that Dr. Alfie is talking about? Sounds like you have, because she said you could be sitting in that expert chair yourself.
I doubt it,
Some of the
but
things that you're doing that are helping you get through each day.
you know, I'm trying. Some days are better than others. I did take up gardening and started to read a lot more, although I got quite distracted. Just being outside a lot more. I think coronavirus obviously allows some of us to still go outside, and that can be really helpful to just get out of your head and get into your body, whether it's in the woods or your backyard or a little park or wherever you can go. I think actually one benefit of this is it's allowed me to acknowledge that I have depression and anxiety, and that not every day is the same. And a couple days ago, I woke up and I just thought, today is not a good day. And I told my partner that, and I acknowledged it to myself. And then I thought, I have to do some more of those things that Dr. Alfie was talking about, and work harder today to try to feel okay. And acknowledging that can just actually be kind of a weight lifted, just saying to yourself, okay, I acknowledge this, and I'm going to try today to get outside and not just mope around inside and live in that feeling, but also try to actively move through it. So I definitely
I'm so glad you
that's
said
key.
that, Elizabeth, because I think one of the biggest lessons I'm learning through this is the concept of being gentle with ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, we go to social media and
Yes.
there's so much judgment,
Yes.
and people are, you know, and I'm guilty of this because I'm one of those personalities that I feel every day with something. But I've been telling friends, you know, just because on my social media page it may look like I'm doing 1,200 things, don't use me as a guide, because you should do whatever it is you want to
That's
do.
right.
And if
That's right.
after this pandemic is over, you haven't written a book, you haven't started
That's
a
right.
podcast, you haven't
That's right.
started gardening, or you haven't
That's right.
remodeled your house, that is
That's right.
perfectly okay. If you
That's
just
right.
decide you're going to sleep, you know, get caught up on rest or listen to music. And I think that's the hard part for so many people, is they do look at what other people are doing and they start judging themselves and think, I got to be doing all of this. And the reality is everyone should just get up, like you said, Elizabeth, and acknowledge how they're feeling that day, and
That's
whatever it is they want to do in this time that feeds them in a positive way. And Dr. Alfie, you mentioned exercise a couple of times, which is good,
Yeah.
because our last segment of the show today, we actually have a fitness trainer on, because we want to just show people, if they can't get those weights that you and your
That's
husband
right.
were trying to find, and I'd had that same experience where I couldn't find those weights in the store, that there's some
Right.
simple things that you can do at home, because we know when we move, you know, there's so much value to that, both mentally and physically. But
That's right.
I just love that, you know, we can have these conversations, and at the end of the day, if you're feeling sad, you know what, it's freaking okay to feel sad, and we've got to be able to acknowledge that. So I don't know, any parting words, Dr. Alfie, for what people should
Sure.
know or in this
Sure.
moment?
So I want to highlight something that Elizabeth said, and that you said, Miss Martin, it is being gentle with yourself, and it is acknowledging that every day is going to be different. And I think it's also important for people to understand and recognize, I say this thing all the time, you have to know your baseline. So you have to know, sort of on just a decent day, not way great, not real horrible, how you feel. And then you can allow yourself to calibrate every day to see sort of where you are on this scale of this continuum, maybe of 1 to 10, where 10 is wonderful and 1 is terrible. And you're always sort of aiming to be like in that 5, but some days you won't be at 5. And if it's a 2, that's okay. If it's a 10, that's okay. And then the one last thing I would say is, I think it's really important for people on social media. I'm so glad you brought it up. You have to pay attention to who you follow. So if the stuff that you follow is making you feel bad, maybe you have to mute that for a little while, and you know what I mean, and follow those pages that give you good information and uplift you and bring you up. So thank you so much for giving me an opportunity.
Well, thanks to both of you for joining us. Elizabeth, great article. I'm sure it touched the lives of a lot of people. I'm sure a lot of people were inspired. And I always know when people tell their personal stories, it encourages someone else to tell their personal story. And that can
Yes.
be healing in and of itself. And always great to see you, Dr. Alfie. I'm sure I'll have you back, because this is a conversation that is not going anywhere. But again, thanks to both of you for sharing and being a
Thank
part of today's show.
Thank you.
All right, so you've heard a lot about exercise. So this next segment coming up, we're going to be talking with one of the country's leading fitness and wellness trainers. His name is Gideon Akande, and he's a coach and founder of Riptensity. Yes, Riptensity. So tell us, Gideon, what is Riptensity?
Well, first off, Ariba, thank you for having me on. I'm super excited to be here and your amazing guest today, and of course, a very much needed subject matter to speak on. And Riptensity is a project that I came out with through the Men's Health brand. And essentially, it's body weight workouts for men and women, all under 30 minutes and for all fitness levels. So especially as we're going through times like this where equipment isn't really accessible, like we just spoke on, where the gyms and facilities that we're so used to going to aren't open, we still want to find a way to move and give our bodies, our minds that break. And Riptensity, as well as all types of body weight movements, are one of those solutions.
So I know you know this, Gideon, as a trainer, as a coach, the biggest issue that us humans have with exercise, we know the studies, we've seen the statistics, we know, the benefit, both emotionally, as well as physically, but it's that motivation. How do we get motivated, particularly now when it seems like every day is the same? Sunday is Tuesday, Tuesday is Thursday, the days just run into each other. How do we get that motivation to exercise when we just want to pull the covers over our head and wish this was all a bad dream?
That is the million-dollar question. How do we get motivated? How do we stay motivated? To your point, all of those challenges we're going through now, but the information is there. We all know the information, so how do we act on it? Well, at the end of the day, fitness is very much an individual journey. So the advice I give to you may work, it may not work. It's all about playing with it and figuring out what works best. But my advice is to find something that you enjoy. So if I told you to lift the heaviest weights in the world, you may not necessarily like that. But if I said, hey, maybe you go out for a walk or a bike ride, maybe it's a swim, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's playing with the kids at the park, any type of movement to get you going and movement that you can find yourself doing consistently and doing regularly is going to help you along your journey. Another piece of advice I would give is to find a community. Find a group of people who are like you, who are also going through very similar challenges. If you're a mom, maybe find a group of mothers. If you're an athlete and a high-level athlete, maybe find another group of high-level athletes. Now, granted, we don't have that same community feel and aspect in terms of going to a gym or congregating with a group of strangers, if you will, but there's still online communities and online programs that are tailored to people just like you, people with knee pain, or people who haven't worked out in a while, or people who are running marathons. So there's something out there for everyone. It's up to us to find it.
And I was going to ask you, I'm glad you brought that up, because obviously, as I've said, I live in California and they opened gyms in June, and now yesterday they just closed gyms again. And I know around the country, there are different policies about whether gyms can be open or closed. And so much is happening online, virtual, everything from parties to weddings, even sadly funerals. But are you finding in the exercise community that people are taking advantage of this, this virtual reality and are really getting together on Zoom calls or Google Hangouts or, FaceTiming and actually exercising together?
Without a doubt. I think in this digital age, and of course with this current situation, we're all forced to immerse ourselves into digital. So whether we are watching more movies and television shows now, or maybe we are ordering our food and all of the devices that we need at home, into enjoying our fitness opportunities and our fitness journeys, we are all shifting to digital. So even with my offering, I saw that there was a great need for people to find some type of consistency and some type of routine in their day by way of exercise. And what I started doing on Instagram initially was live workouts every day at 5 p.m. Central, as I'm in Chicago, and people would show up. And it started small, and people would continue to show up, and they invite friends, and next thing you know, we built a massive community. And over time, they started to see, like, I just needed some type of consistency. I needed something to show up for that was also going to be a good disconnect for myself and a good reconnect to my mind and my body. And exercise was doing just that. So there's Zoom, there's Vimeo, there's YouTube, there's the trainer down the street to your favorite fitness celebrity. There's always something out there. We just have to take advantage of what's available to us.
All right, Gideon, this is the moment of truth.
Oh, yeah.
This is where we're about to get it. So, we invited you because we wanted you to share that great information and help people feel that motivation that we know they need. But we also wanted you to demonstrate what people can do at home if you don't have weights, if you don't have, expensive equipment. Everybody doesn't have a gym. you know, in their basement or in a spare room. Most people are just working with whatever they have, and the stores are sold out of everything. So
Everything.
you're going to give us a demonstration that anyone can do, any fitness level at home with what you have. So no excuses. And I'm going to stand up and try to get on camera with you and do this workout with you. So go easy on me, because I've been one of those people that hasn't been at the gym in a long time. So
Don't you worry about it. And anybody who's at home, anyone who's at home who may be a high-level athlete or somebody who is just wants to exercise for the first time, this is for you. By the way, let me just throw it out there. On my website, GideonAkonde.com, I have tons of free body weight workouts that you can do at home, in the park, wherever you may be. So let's get started, and I'm talking to you, whoever may be watching. So first thing I'm going to show you is a great exercise for specifically the midsection, the core. I think everyone at some point in time wants to have this area stronger, and it's going to do a lot for you in terms of making sure that you are limiting yourself from injury, not having back pain, abdominal pain, things of that nature. So if you're a newbie, feel free to grab a chair, an ottoman, a bed, an elevated surface, and this is how you start. You take both hands, place them directly under your shoulders on top of that flat surface. You step one leg back, you step the opposite leg back, and you hold your body in a straight line from your heels to the top of your head. And over time, you're gonna feel a little bit of that core action. How you feeling over there, Reba?
I'm okay. This feels
You're
okay.
looking strong. Yep. And so this is a great entry-level exercise. Now, over time, you can start to lower that surface, eventually to the point where you get down to the ground. And what I mean by that is you'll be holding a plank position on the floor here. Now, this makes it more challenging because we changed the angle. But again, this is the same exercise. We just changed the angle a little bit to challenge you appropriately based off your fitness level and your expertise. All right,
Just for the
next
record,
exercise.
before the gym's closed, I could hold a minute 30 plank. So,
Ooh, look at you. Oh, now you're just showing off. Now you're just showing off.
well, of course.
The next exercise are going to be squats, and squats are great for the lower body. And I know you may be used to seeing people squatting with weight on their back, or maybe doing body weight squats without any type of chair or assistance. But a great place to start is just literally grabbing a seat. Whether you're sitting at the couch or sitting at your desk, maybe you just want to take a little bit of a break from staying in the same position. Set up your feet shoulder width apart, feet flat on the ground, and right from where you are, you stand up, and then you sit right back down. And again, this is just a repetition. Going through these movements, focusing on what you should be feeling, squeezing the glutes as you stand, keeping the torso upright, breathing with the movement is a great way to keep you moving, keep you active, working that lower body at any time of the day. So that's your second exercise.
Okay,
You ready for the third?
I'm ready.
All right, the third exercise, I'm actually gonna grab some light weights. Now this is the thing, you do not need weights for this next exercise. Matter of fact, if you have water bottles at home, if you have canned goods at home, if you have anything that you can just hold into your hands, this will be great for the upper body. And if you don't have anything at all, you can still do this body weight. We just extend the work time to allow you to feel that burn. So if you follow me with your palms facing forward, we're going into bicep curls. So we're working the front side of the arm, curling all the way up, right back down. And from here, we can even take it to a lateral raise, meaning hands down by the side, we lift out to the side. Now I'm holding on to 3-pound weights right now, but if I do this for 30, 45 seconds, 1 minute, it'll eventually start to burn. And again, I'm working biceps, I'm working shoulders, even into the frontal raise here, I'm getting the entire arm. And again, this will start to burn as your body works through these ranges of motion. So that's your next exercise.
Okay, feels good.
And then your last one is all about getting that heart rate up. Now, I know you may be thinking, oh man, what is this guy gonna have me do? But don't worry, most of us at one point in time have done jumping jacks. And you may be used to seeing jumping jacks like this. Light on the toes, hands up nice and high, but you may be saying to me right now, and I know Areva's looking at me at the side eye, like I'm dressed too nicely to be doing these jumping jacks right now. I get it. Maybe you're at work, maybe you're dressed nicely, maybe you have knee pain or back pain and jumping isn't for you. You have an option to go toe taps, tapping out to the side, raising the hands overhead. And of course, you can always pick up your speed without the jumping to get that heart rate up. And then when you feel like you're able, you can add that jump over time.
All right, I'm gonna jump.
Yeah, oh, okay. Woo, look at you go. And the great thing about these movements, again, is you do them for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 1 minute long. Give yourself a little bit of a break, as much as you need in between. You'll be sure to feel that sweat, be thankful that you're able to move your body, enjoy that health, and of course, feel stronger in the long term.
Well, that is fantastic, Gideon. Great workout. Make sure you visit his website, check him out, get motivated, get fit. We can't change what's happening with respect to coronavirus, but we can change what we do ourselves. We can get off the couch and we can get moving, and we know it'll not only help our bodies, but it'll help our minds. Again, thank you so much. I just want to remind everyone, be safe out there. We are all in this together, and by
Yes.
all means, wear a mask. All right, y'all. See you next time.